Well, good morning, committee. It's right at start time, so we'll begin here right away. Thanks for persevering through the weather and driving conditions, what it is, and the cold. Appreciate that very much. I had not heard from Senator Francisco. She's never late. So I was a little concerned about that, but we'll see what transpires here. Okay, the schedule for today is we're having budget review for Department of Agriculture and the Kansas State Fair. We're going to start with the Kansas State Fair because that equipment was, I know, but that equipment was set up. But we'll first hear from an analyst. Victoria, would you give us an overview of the budget?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Victoria Potts with Legislative Research. I'm actually going to start with the green sheet in front of you. Because policy committees don't generally hear budgets, we've been asked to give you a very short overview of what this process will look like. So what you're doing today is called a budget hearing. First, you'll hear from me, and then you'll hear from the agency and have the opportunity to ask questions. Tomorrow, you'll work the budget or make recommendations, as it's called in the budget process. So if you want to add money, make a comment to the agency, that's the time to do that, is tomorrow. And then after you make recommendations, you'll receive a summary document from me, so summarizing the recommendations that you made. Sorry, I feel like I'm echoing. Summarizing the recommendations that you made. We used to have you sign a printed copy, but this year I'm going to email you a copy of that summary document, and I'll ask that you reply to me saying that you are allowing the budget to move forward in the process. So it's not saying that you agree with every recommendation that was made. It's not saying that. It's saying that you allow this budget to move forward to Senate Ways and Means, which is the next step in the process. So that's all that means. So after you get the email, I ask that you reply to me. Please don't hit reply all. That would break Kansas Open Meeting Act requirements, and the reviser will get on me. So please only reply to me when you get the summary document. And I would stand for any questions on the process. I know that was brief.
Okay, no questions at this point. Thank you very much, Victoria. We may begin with the overview.
Great, so I'm gonna go start with the Kansas State Fair document on white in front of you. The first few pages of this document are either overview or summary information, so it provides some history on the agency and past legislative action. And then also summary information that we'll get into later in the document. So I'm actually going to move straight to page 692. On page 692, I'm looking underneath the box in the middle of the page, that second paragraph. The agency estimates revised fiscal year 2021 operating expenditures of $2.5 million, including $300,000 state general fund. This is an all funds decrease of $4.4 million and an SGF decrease of $1 million below the approved amount. That $1 million state general fund decrease is due to the agency not including the state general fund coronavirus relief fund money that was approved by the Legislative Coordinating Council, and it's only not included because that was approved after the agency submitted their budget. So the agency submits their budget in October, but that money wasn't approved until November, but you'll see it in the governor's recommendation, but that's the difference between the approved. The all funds decrease, that $2.5 million, is due to decreased expenditures across all expenditure categories due to the cancellation of the fair in 2020. So the fair was unable to be held due to COVID, so the agency is spending less money, and it also received less revenue. So that's the difference between the approved and the revised request for fiscal year 2021. And if you move to page 693, that provides a breakout by expenditure category, and again, it's just decreases across all of those due to the cancellation of the fair In that last paragraph on the page, the governor recommends fiscal year 2021 operating expenditures of $3.5 million, including $1.3 million state general fund. Is an increase of $1 million because the governor did include that recommendation from the Legislative Coordinating Council for $1 million. And just as a reminder to the committee, during the special session, the legislature earmarked $50 million state general fund to assist state agencies with coronavirus expenditures, and that's part of where that $1 million is coming from. So it's coming from that $50 million. So it's not CARES money, just to make sure it's not federal funds, it is state funds. And I would stand for questions on fiscal year 2021.
All right, thank you, Victoria. Committee, any questions for Victoria on the summary? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a little difficult. I'm on 691. It's a little difficult to follow and understand the moving numbers here because we have the actual for 20, the agency estimate for various years, and the governor's rec, and those numbers are having wide swings. For example, on the administration part, and I realize as a committee we're hit with this just now, and we will have not much time, Mr. Chairman, to actually understand these numbers and make recommendations, which has always been a frustration for me as a legislator when I served on appropriations 5 years. But can you help me understand these wide swings by program administration and by major objective expenditures, wages and salaries, and then contractual services? Possibly if I added those up, they would come close to being level, but it just challenges me when I see the numbers just jump up and down and all around. The agency says one thing, the governor says something different.
Sure. So if you're looking at page 691, I'll start on towards the left, the agency estimate, left-hand side. So the difference between the estimate for fiscal year 2021, which is the column second from the left, and the request for fiscal year 2022, we haven't gotten fiscal year 2022 yet, but that's because the fair is anticipating holding the state fair event that year, so expenditures are going to go back up to normal levels in fiscal year 2022. In 21, we didn't hold the fair. 22, they're hoping to hold the fair, so they're going to be spending more money, and as well as receiving more revenue.
So the fair is, even though it was in 2020, or would have been, it's in fiscal year, it's after July the 1st.
Exactly, yeah, the fiscal year is named for the year that it ends in. So it runs from July 1st to June 30th, and it's named for the year that it ends in. So we are currently in fiscal year 21 because it will end on June 30th, 2021.
I don't know that I'm going to be able to ask intelligent questions here, Mr. Chairman, or get an understanding, so hopefully by spending some time away from committee we can, but thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Victoria? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Sorry, would you like me to go to fiscal year 2022?
Okay.
Sorry, like we did get,
Okay.
sorry about that. So,
Far ahead there.
no, you're fine. Page 694 for fiscal year 2022. On page 694, underneath the box, the agency requests operating expenditures of $5.2 million, including $690,000 state general fund. This is an increase of $2.7 million. And an SGF increase of $390,000 from the 2021 revised estimate. And kind of like I just mentioned, the increase is due to the anticipation of holding the fair the next fiscal years. So expenditures will be returning back to normal levels. So yeah, 2.7 of increase does sound like a lot, but to be honest, that's just returning to the fair's normal operating numbers when they're able to hold the state fair event. I would like to point out on page 695, there's a box labeled enhancements. The agency has requested one enhancement of $425,000, all from the state general fund, to hire seasonal fair time workers. The fair generally hires about 600 people to assist with the fair. but due to a lack of revenue from not holding last year's fair, they don't have the revenue to hire those 600 people, so they're asking for $425,000 to assist with that, but the governor did not recommend that enhancement. So that means the starting point for every budget hearing is the governor's recommendation, so by not recommending that, it's currently not included in the starting place budget, if you will. And I would just go to one more place in this budget. On the very last page, on the very back, 702 capital improvements. The committee's probably aware, but just to make sure, a capital improvement, if a state agency owns its own buildings or grounds, they pay to maintain those, and those expenses are called capital improvements. So because the fair owns the fair grounds, they have to pay to maintain them. So underneath the box, the agency estimates 2021 capital improvement expenditures of $1 million. This is a decrease of $288,000, all from special revenue funds below the approved amount. And this decrease is due to decreased expenditures on maintenance. Again, the fair cut costs because it didn't have the revenue from the state fair event, so they cut down maintenance to a bare minimum, as well as delaying the start of the Expo Center until fiscal year 2022. And finally, underneath that fiscal year 2022, the agency requests capital improvement expenditures of $1.3 million. This is an all funds increase of $288,000. And again, that's due to returning to normal levels of maintenance, as well as starting the repair of the Expo Center. I just blanked for a second. And the governor did concur with the agency's capital improvements request. And now I'll stand for questions on fiscal year 2022 or the state fair's budget as a whole.
All right, thank you very much. Committee, any questions? Senator McGinn.
I see LCC's meeting this week, and I believe there was a request by the Legislative Budget Committee on December 15th to give the state fair $1.3 million of that coronavirus money that we allocated. Do you know if that's on their agenda?
I do not know if that's on their agenda, no. Last time the LCC met to discuss the additional 1.3, so I talked about 1 million being recommended. There was an additional 1.3 recommended by Legislative Budget Committee, but the Legislative Coordinating Council decided to wait to see if the fair would receive any federal aid before giving state general fund. So they were waiting to see if that would happen. I don't believe that the state fair is going to receive any federal aid. So they're meeting again. I don't know if that's on their agenda.
It'd have to be under a new program because we looked everywhere and they're not eligible. So
Right.
I'll wait for my other questions after the state fair presents.
Committee, any other questions? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for helping us understand the budget. So, my concern would be about having funding for hiring the seasonal workers because they're going to need to be hired. Was there any carryover of those funds from the previous year because that was not used, and maybe that's a better question for the fair?
I'll let the fair address it more, but I would say that generally the fair doesn't carry over a lot of money, and so, but even though they didn't hold the fair this year, so they weren't spending the money, they also didn't receive any money. The state fair event generates 90% of this agency's revenue. So by not holding the fair event, no, they weren't spending money, but they also weren't getting any.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering a couple things, but on all other funds, does Reno County or Hutch help with any of the expenses? I mean, they get an economic impact on that community. What do they do to help with the process?
There is I believe it's called the Friends of the Fair account that Reno County I don't know if I want to say contributes to. I'll let the agency answer that. But generally, those funds are designated for specific projects, not overall operating expenditures. So as last I was aware, those funds have not been used to supplement the agency's loss, but I'll let the agency answer more to that. But there is such an account.
Okay. And I was wondering about debt service. You know how much debt they got?
Sure. So looking at the last page, 702 still, debt service principal is the third line down. So, yeah.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the Expo Center, didn't we change something last year to give the Expo Center some sales tax money to do those repairs?
Sure. It wasn't specifically for the Expo Center. In 2018, Senate Bill 415 passed, allowing the State Fair to keep any sales tax revenue of sales made on State Fair grounds. That was because previously, the State Fair Capital Improvements Fund was by statute supposed to receive a $300,000 transfer from the State General Fund to assist with capital improvements like the Expo Center. But that transfer hadn't been made in years, to be honest. So to make up to change the system and allow the fair to have some funds to perform capital improvements, Senate Bill 415 was passed, allowing them to keep sales tax revenue.
Do we know how much that was proposed to be?
Sure. So in fiscal year 19, I think it was about 312,000. For fiscal year 21, the one that we're currently in, because there was no fair, it's only estimated to be 80,000. And then next year, it's again about 300,000, assuming the State Fair event gets to be held.
Thank you.
Committee, anybody else? Seeing none, thank you, Victoria. Next, we'll have the interim director of the State Fair, Dr. Berger. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about the Kansas State Fair and the impact that COVID has had on the fair. Certainly, when you look at the State Fair, there's probably no event in the state of Kansas that draws all parts of Kansas together. From corner to corner with cultural, agricultural, industrial, education. All right. All right. Thank you. But the State Fair draws all elements of the state together. It's really something that is unique to Kansas, brings everybody together for a celebration of everything from education to agriculture, 4-H, FFA, whatever it might be. Certainly that is what the Kansas State Fair is all about. In 2019, the last year we had a fair, we had about 337,000 attendees. One of the larger fairs that we've had. A lot of our attendance, of course, depends on weather, and we had perfect weather in 2019. We also had about 14,000 school children at the fair. We call it Kansas' largest classroom. We have a facility now dedicated to education and really involve a lot of the USDs in that activity. We have a grandstand that seats about 9,000. We had about 24,000 in the grandstand events in 2019. We have a number of vendors from across the state and selling all sorts of projects, representing all sorts of agencies. Carnival and sponsorship revenue was up dramatically in 2019. We, of course, are never going to rest on our laurels. We have a lot of changes in the Kansas State Fair. First was a logo, new logo, and that new logo really symbolizes Kansas. From the sunflower to the blue ribbon to Kansas across the center. We're emphasizing Kansas tourism. We have communities across Kansas that are invited to present their special activities and festivals. We also have Kansas entertainment on our free stages. Again, it's a focus on Kansas all across the board. Of course, one of the things we really enjoy is the legislative showmanship contest as part of the Grand Drive. That is something of a highlight, I think, for the fair itself, and that is something we always celebrate. A couple of the new things we did in 2019, one was to have a partner on the patio event in the grandstand. That partner on the patio event allows us to take those people who are making contributions, investment in the fair, and kind of celebrate with them And also, of course, looking at a party pit around the grandstand, giving people standing room only around the performance. Performers like that, and so do the attendees. New in 2019, we had free concerts in Retz and Young, primarily Kansas concerts. New competitions, beer brewing and butter sculpting. I'm not sure what the butter sculpting turned out to be, but it was available at least. Pollinator gardeners, something that we added to the fair. There's lots of space on the fairgrounds, and that's part of our education program, is making sure young people know about pollinators and what they involve. We have an entire building now dedicated to education, formerly the Do Art building. We have a draft horse parade, which I think is always something that's a highlight. I looked at this photo, I thought it was kind of interesting. We've got draft horse parade, but the second team is mules, a pair of mules. So I thought, kind of interesting, we're calling those mules draft horses. I guess we can't do that. The monster trucks was the biggest event for the grandstand in 2019, the biggest selling event. In 21, Fair of 21, we've initiated some changes as well. One of those is being a new mascot for the fair, Ike the Bison. Ike the Bison has been touring across Kansas, talking about the fair and making sure people are aware of the changes that are taking place in the fair. Well, we're also going to be having a bull riding tour, part of the next gen bull riding tour. Quarter horse versatility. We've had quarter horse shows in the past, but quarter horse versatility is really something more like a cow pony type of competition. How those horses work with in the field and actively do what they're supposed to be doing on the ranch and farm. Special Olympics is going to be involved in the grand drive as far as showmanship. And then on Tuesday and Thursday, those are typically our light days, and we're going to have $4 Tuesday and Thursday after 4, again trying to increase our numbers on those evenings. The second weekend we're going to do is Explore Kansas, and that's the opportunity for communities in Kansas to showcase what their special events are. It's really been very popular across the state of Kansas. Then to, I guess, buoy up our vendors a little bit, Shop to Our Drop on Wednesday. Those vendors will be providing discounts for the people attending. And then we'll have the first ever pub crawl at the fair in 21. Where does our funding come from? Well, we're a fee-funded organization. We have, during the fair itself, commercial vendors, we have corporate sponsors, we have food sales, gate admission, concert tickets, and midway sales. We have non-fair events also, and we have an RV park that's quite busy, especially during the fair. We have an average of 500 events on the fairgrounds during the year. And lots of times people think of the fair being something that is 10 days in September, but it's really much more than that. We also have some issues as far as our physical plant. We talked about the Expo Center. We were to begin rehabbing the Expo Center this current year, but of course didn't have the funds to make that happen. Part of that is rehabbing a roof that is in need of repair. Metal walls need to be upgraded. Some column bases are rusting as well. Improving ventilation and doing some work with corral fencing as well, and renovating restrooms, and also that's financed by KDFA, 7-year program. We'll start that in 21, fiscal year 22. We were supposed to start that in fiscal year 21, but of course didn't have the revenue to make that happen. Another project that we're looking at, kind of long-term, is resurfacing and milling the roadways and walkways across the fairgrounds. That's about an $850,000 project. We want to make sure we get on that and make that, those improvements, get those improvements in place before they deteriorate any further. And then, of course, looking at the grandstand. The grandstand, as you see it now, is probably about a 1930 facility. And the concrete within that grandstand has a lot of cracks in it. And when you have cracks in concrete, you have water penetrating, you have rust in the rebar, and chunks coming out. So that's about a $150,000 project that we want to do before it causes any significant damage to the facility. Future projects, one is looking at the Bison Arena. Bison Arena, really an iconic building on our campus. It was built in 1937. It cost about $103,000. It was permanently closed in 2019 by the fire marshal, and we're looking at perhaps upgrading that facility, at least making it in code with the fire marshal. If we do, one of the suggestions is an education center would be about $11 million. COVID impacted us significantly, cost us a significant amount of revenue, up to 90% of our revenue generated from the fair itself. The events on the fairgrounds declined from about 500 to 150. We have everything from cattle shows to whatever, and because of COVID, why a lot of them were reduced or eliminated. In response, we reduced our workforce by 25%, furloughed 4 individuals, and we asked for $2.3 million in COVID funds, and we received $1 million. The Budget Committee did approve the 1.3. The Legislative Coordinating Council has not yet acted on the balance of 1.3. We're also going to be involved in naming buildings, aggressively trying to raise private funds to help buoy up the expenses of the state fair. When we start the fiscal year, need about a balance of $1 million to start the fair. And that's because we have so many expenses on the front end before the fair begins. And we'll begin drawing down those monies that we received at $1 million. We already have started drawing some of those down, using those for utilities. So that is going to impact us significantly. We have before you Senate Bill number 1. That Senate Bill number 1 would allow us to use those capital improvement funds for general fund expenditures. Currently, that fund has about $550,000 in it. Our fee fund account has about, last time I checked, about $125,000. Our monthly expenses are about $220,000. So when you look at the Kansas State Fair, to me, it's a Kansas tradition. Personally, why it's been something that's been part of my life forever. We lived a half mile off of Highway 50. I can remember that traffic going down Highway 50, only wanting to be part of that Kansas State Fair. And luckily, from the time I was 6 or 7, always went to the fair. It is the great Kansas get-together, all 4 corners of the state, celebrating agriculture, culture, and education. It's a wonderful event, and we certainly appreciate the support we've received from the citizens of Kansas and also the legislature. With that, I'd stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back, Senator Berger.
Good to be back.
The Expo Center, you talked about the roof. Does insurance take care of any of that?
It wasn't damage. What it was
Old age.
deterioration.
Oh, okay.
It's been on the, I suppose that's about a 1970s building, and that's normal rehab, and need to upgrade a little bit as well.
The Bison.
Good example of that, we had in December, we had the Kansas Beef Expo. Use that facility. We had over 1,000 head of cattle at that Kansas Beef Expo, biggest one we've ever had. And that's because shows closed in Nebraska and Iowa and places like that. So they came down to Kansas. And it was a tremendous success. Last weekend we had about 300 cattle, and the week before that we had the Kansas Ag Association. So that facility is being used all the time.
The Bison Arena. You said that, how much was that going to take to get that so it's?
I think we can, with about $800,000, we can be in compliance with the fire marshal. And, we have lots of different possible uses for it. It's a great space on our campus. One of the things I thought we might try to do is use that for an arena, which is what it was traditionally designed for. And we have a partnership with Skills USA. And that partnership with Skills USA is revamping the encampment building and using that for education purposes. And we might shift more of our education over to the encampment building.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question. That there's a 13-member fair board that decides whether or not to hold the fair, correct?
Yes.
When will they make the decision definitively to hold the 2021 fair or not?
We are going to have the fair in 21.
Okay. I just wanted to be sure of that before we.
We cannot waver from that. We got to be like a laser on that one, Because if we don't have the fair in 21, we're really out of business.
I think there were individuals that wanted to have the fair in 2020.
There were.
Under the principle that if you can walk through the grocery store, you know, then why can't you walk around an open air fairgrounds and
One of the issues, Senator, was we had several vendors who were not going to participate. A lot of, for instance, we have an Ambucks Club that has an ice cream booth, and their members are seniors. And they said, you know, we're not going to be able to do it this year. And so we had a lot of vendors like that, and that would have probably changed the focus dramatically of the fair. It might have ended up costing us money instead of making us money.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe it was last year, maybe the year before, that we allowed expansion of the beer garden, where they could walk around.
No, that actually was, there was a bill passed that would allow, I think, for festivals and that kind of thing, to be able to walk around. Now, there was Senate Bill 408, that I think you're talking about, that didn't have time to take action. And we're bringing that back forward as Senate Bill 2. And that, I believe that's in your committee now, so.
Right. So the question that I had with that, and maybe, hope you can answer it, how large is that area going to be?
The State Fair Board will determine that, and being a very, I think, conservative body, why it will be something that is probably relatively small, but allow at least some movement from the beer garden itself.
It's not going to be all over the whole entire fairgrounds. And then you get the sales tax.
Yes. Yeah, our goal with Senate Bill 2 is to take the revenue from, sales tax revenue from that and put that in the capital improvement.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I did ask about making sure you had the funds available to hire workers for this year. How does that fit in with the 2.3 million? If you get all of that, is that included?
If we have the 2.3, certainly that will allow us to get started with fair. Our expenditures will start happening probably in late March or April to prepare for the fair. Again, we're going to have to bring back some employees. We are so understaffed now that we're going to have some employees back to get that thing ramped up and going. But it's 2.3 to allow us to get moving with that, move forward with it. As you can see, we've had a lot of capital improvements that need to be addressed as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try and keep it brief so you can hear from the agency. So I'll move straight to page 614 in your Department of Agriculture budget analysis. On page 614, I'm looking underneath the box in the middle of the page. The agency estimates revised 2021 expenditures of $55.9 million, including $9.8 million SGF. This is an all funds increase of $3.7 million. The revised estimate also includes $2.8 million in reappropriations from the State Water Plan Fund. So I'm sure the agency is aware, but unspent funds from the previous fiscal year called reappropriations are allowed to carry over into the next fiscal year. So reappropriations, carryover funds, same thing. So $2.8 million were carried over from the State Water Plan Fund into fiscal year 2021. And to take a closer look at that $3.7 million increase, I'm going to move to page 315. Page 315 breaks out fiscal year 2021 by expenditure category, and that increase comes in primarily two category expenditures. The first one is contractual services, which is your second bullet. And the greatest amount of the main cause of increase in contractual services are those State Water Plan Fund reappropriations. So about halfway through the paragraph, you can see the all funds increases due to increased expenditures on stream bank stabilization, basin management, and non-point source pollution assistance from State Water Plan Fund reappropriations. The second major category that's causing an increase from the approved is other assistance, which is that last bullet. Again, that's due to State Water Plan Fund reappropriations, but it's also due to the agency's supplemental request for the Kansas Reservoir Protection Initiative, and we'll talk about that on the next page in a minute. And before I move to that, at the very last paragraph on the page, the governor recommends fiscal year 2021 expenditures of $57.4 million, including $9.4 million state general fund. This is an increase of $1.5 million from the agency's revised estimate. And that increase is primarily due to the governor recommending the transfer of $2.8 million from coronavirus relief money, so that's federal funds, the CARES funds, from the Department of Commerce to the Department of Agriculture for the Food Stability Assistance Program. So originally that money was allocated to Department of Agriculture for the program. It's now being transferred to it was originally allocated to Department of Commerce, now it's being transferred to the Department of Agriculture. The Food Stability Assistance Program provides assistance to meat processing facilities and food producers to address supply chain issues, so it allows them to expand or hire more people to address supply chain issues. On page 616, above the box, not only did the governor recommend that transfer, she also recommended the application of a 5% salaries and wages shrinkage rate. You're going to ask me what shrinkage means. The technical definition of shrinkage is the difference between the cost of fully funding salary and wages. So if every position was filled all year, so no vacancies, no turnover, every position's filled all year, and then you subtract the amount that is saved due to turnover or vacancy. So what it means in layman's terms to apply a 5% salaries and wages shrinkage rate, the governor has recommended that the agency spend less on salary and wages in fiscal year 2021, basically. Shrinkage is a weird concept to grasp, even for me, to be honest. And I would just note one more thing about fiscal year 2021. The governor's recommendation also includes a proposed allotment plan to decrease the agency's state water plan fund expenditures by $1.2 million for fiscal year 2021. So the governor, over the summer, requested that the agency spend $1.2 million less from the state water plan fund than was originally approved. Still on page 616 for fiscal year 2021, I mentioned that the agency has a couple of supplemental requests. The first one in the box is for the Kansas Reservoir Protection Initiative, and that totals $820,000, all from the State Water Plan Fund. This program provides financial assistance to landowners above federal reservoirs to implement sediment reducing conservation practices. These funds were originally allocated to the Kansas Water Office, but now they're being transferred to the Department of Agriculture. So we're not increasing spending statewide, we're just transferring funds. And that second supplemental for $212,000 from the Federal Coronavirus Relief Fund. And those expenditures are for communication services to enable work from home and for PPE. And the governor did concur with both of these supplemental requests, so they are included in the starting place budget. And I'll stand for questions on fiscal year 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you were talking about some increases from the state water plan, but there was also a reduction.
Right.
And the reduction, I mean, the state water plan is not SGF at this point, right? It's, I mean, are those from SGF monies, or is that from the, funding that we get from city water?
Sure. So overall, the State Water Plan Fund has a couple of funding sources. So some of them are fees, yes, but there is a transfer from the State General Fund to the State Water Plan Fund. I'll say that the allotment of $1.2 million That number comes from additional projects the legislature added last year that required an additional transfer from the state general fund to the state water plan fund. So I don't speak for the governor, but you could say that because those required an additional transfer, she asked the agency not to spend that money so that the transfer from the state general fund would be less.
Thank you, that helps me understand that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the operating expenditures, it's interesting to me that and that's on page 612. 2020, and it's hard to follow for me, I'm sorry, the bouncing ball because of federal money coming in due to COVID and various other things, but the state general fund and the all funds were significantly higher in 2020 than they are in 2022. Pardon me. They've gone down on the state general fund the last 2 years, but can you help me grasp that at all? Is it strictly because of COVID or CARES Act money? Or does my question even make sense?
No, it does. You're asking basically the difference between 2020 and 2021, 2022-ish, really 22 because it's lower. I have information on 2020 on my computer. I just don't have it in front of me, so I'll gladly provide that to you and the committee afterwards, if that's okay.
That's fine with me. Again, just trying to
Sure.
grasp on why the swing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Be quick. Thank you. The coronavirus money, was that allocated through the Spark Committee?
Yes.
And then why, and the agency, I guess, can answer this, but for people to work from home, doesn't everybody have a state computer already?
I would let the agency answer that, what additional equipment they needed.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm going to do fiscal year 2022, super fast, I promise. No, you're fine. On page 617, underneath the box, fiscal year 2022 expenditures of $51.5 million, including $9.9 million state general fund. This is a decrease of $4.3 million. And basically that comes down to two things. One, there's no CARES money, so it's a decrease of $4.3 million. $2.8 million of that is no more CARES money for that food stability program that I just talked about. And also in 2022, we talked about the rollover funds for the state water plan fund. Those are also not in 2022. So the expenditures were higher in 21 due to rollover funds, and now they're not there for the state water plan fund in 2022. I'll turn the page to 618. The governor, at the very bottom of the page, the governor recommends 2022 expenditures of $48.8 million. This is a decrease of $2.8 million and a state general fund decrease of $990,000 below the agency's request. This decrease is generally due to three things. First, the governor did not recommend $925,000 worth of enhancements, and we'll talk about those on the next page. The governor recommended implementing $990,000 in reduced resources, and again, we'll talk about those in a minute. And then the governor also, again, recommended that 5% shrinkage rate that we talked about for fiscal year 2021. Turning the page to 619, we'll look at those enhancements that I mentioned. The agency had 3 enhancements, all from the state water plan fund: $450,000 for watershed dam construction, $225,000 for conservation reserve enhancement program, or CREP, to retire water rights, and $250,000 for stream bank stabilization. And again, the governor did not recommend any of these enhancement requests. And finally, for fiscal year 2022, we'll touch on reduced resources. Reduced resources means the governor asked all agencies that receive state general fund to propose a reduced resources budget, which means reducing their state general fund expenditures by 10%. So all agencies that receive state general fund were asked to propose this for the governor. You'll see details of the Department of Agriculture's reduced resources budget on page 620. The first few all relate to holding positions open. And then there's further details of further reduced resources carrying on to page 621. And again, the governor did recommend implementing this budget, so the agency's state general fund budget has been reduced by 10% by adopting this reduced resources budget. And I will stand for questions on 22 and the Department of Agriculture's budget as a whole.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. There was a three-page presentation that I put together to proceed more of the budget discussions, and I'm going to just hit a few highlights of that and not go through that in interest of time. And then Kellen Leaps, our CFO, and the rest of our staff prepared a fairly good in-depth document about our agency and positions and the budget. So she would be anxious, I'm sure, to help in response to questions. And then also I think our Deputy Secretary, Kelsey Olson, is probably listening in. I would say that, you know, everybody has been impacted by the pandemic. When it did hit, we tried to make sure that those services that we provide that are essential for continuity of operations for those industries, that they continued. Probably the biggest example was with about 90 state meat and poultry inspected plants. For those to operate, they have to have inspection. So our inspection crew, not only did they continue working, but because of increased demand, they actually worked more and worked some Saturdays to keep up all through the height of the pandemic. And there are other instances too where we responded to complaints, but also provided the service when it was necessary for our stakeholders to continue. Probably one of the more rewarding programs that we had this year is that we worked with the Department of Commerce in designing the Securing Local Foods Grant Program. And then in the last 60 days of the year, we essentially managed it and served as case managers. So we had about a dozen of our staff that worked with case managers on over 250 recipients of a little over $11 million. And that went to help meat processing and locker plants. There's like an example of a church in Kansas City that used the funds to develop a community kitchen. We had specialty crop farmers that were utilizing it. Some examples would be to provide some water system technology. We had quite a few local grocery stores that were accessing these funds, and then food banks and food pantries. And I have a page, I don't think we provided it to you, and we can leave that with you, but it's a whole page summary of that program, and it breaks out the categories and the counties where this money was provided. So if you like, we'll provide that to you. And then I would just say it was a stressful year, and we just looked at the numbers on our website that we started in October 19 called kansasagstress.org. It's not new information that we developed. We just simply worked with a lot of different stakeholders and pulled it in to a website where folks with some ag background who could go to and then access some resources that are available. It looks like there was over 2,500 visits to that site in 2020. What's interesting to me, though, is that the time people were on that averaged 18 minutes. So you know how often we go on a website and just look for a few minutes. To have an average of 18 minutes means that there were some people that were spending considerable time, and hopefully it was some helpful. The positive news is that the first part of 2021 thus far, the visits and the hits on that website are down substantially. So I hope that's an indication that there's less stress. But so I'll just stop at this point and help respond to questions and try to get Kellen up here if there's time to go over that other document.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming, Mr. Secretary. I was noticing during Veronica, you're holding 3 positions on the agricultural marketing program. How much is that going to hurt us not marketing our products? I mean,
Well, those positions, at least one of those were open when I came to the agency in January 2019, and a couple of people left. But we still have, I think, a pretty strong crew and we'll just prioritize on what we think we can get the most benefit from.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't realize the senator to my left was finished, but on the reduced resources, which I really appreciate you looking to save $1 million of taxpayer money, and I'm not the one that likes to spend money, probably wouldn't even approve an increase. But having said all that, looking at these reduced resources, if you were to say there's 1 or 2 that really would be beneficial to the department or to the ag industry, Mr. Secretary, do you have a thought?
Well, it wasn't easy to come up with these.
I understand it.
And I would say that, we're holding 2 positions in water appropriations, but we still have some other vacancies. So I think if we fill those vacancies, we'll be able to process the proposals that we get on water appropriations, structures. I would say the one that maybe was the most difficult was the 25,000 reduction for feral swine control. State general fund monies is about 175,000 total, and we trimmed it back to 150,000. Kansas is really fortunate that we've been able to knock back and control a very low population of feral swine, given that our state, Oklahoma to the south and Missouri to the east, lots of those numbers, and they're coming across. But I would tell you that I'm in conversation with Secretary of Wildlife and Parks, and he's optimistic that maybe for 1 year he can help provide the 25,000 to shore that up for fiscal year 22, and then we'll look at fiscal year 23 next year.
Well, it indicates in that bullet point that it's for matching dollars from federal funds. So does that mean this is a $50,000 reduction because 25 from the state, 25 from Fed?
In that program, they're not really a dollar for dollar match. They put in substantially more than 175,000. So I don't think if we went to 150,000, I don't believe they would reduce their contribution by that, nor will it change theirs if we add it. So long answer, it's not a dollar for dollar match, but it adds to and continues that budget at the same level.
Well, that is an important part of trying
It is.
to control feral hogs, so they can do a lot of damage. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, the biggest area of concern would be, I'd call it south central and southeast. It's along the border of Oklahoma and along the border of Missouri. That's where the biggest issues are. I might add, I forgot to mention that when we talked to the House committee, there was one wish that we shared with them, and after this budget was put together and after the first of the year, we learned that the agency and me personally is now a defendant in a lawsuit brought about in regards to water. And so we talked to the House Natural Resources Committee about a $30,000 over 2 fiscal years to help in our defense, even if we need some outside counsel. So that you may see more of that if it comes from the House.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Beam, for bringing that up. That's definitely an issue for my district, a very important issue. And even though we have these outside groups, I would call them special interest groups, suing our state and infringing on our private property rights. How do you see this this enhancement request that the governor has not recommended the 225,000 for the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. How do you see that money could actually be utilized, even though the governor hasn't recommended it? How can you use that to help protect those water rights in that area?
So, the reason I mean, this was a proposal from the Water Authority. They suggested that we put another 225,000 for that program that would help leverage federal dollars to buy out water rights on a voluntary basis, particularly in the Rattlesnake Creek Basin. If this doesn't get funded, there's still some funds there to continue that program, because there's been 2 fiscal years that money's been appropriated for that program, and I don't remember the total. But we haven't been able to do the contracts because we've been waiting for the guidelines from USDA. They just are now being finalized. So it'll reduce some participation, but there's still some money in that line for programs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was going to be my question as well, and I think it's that's been an area of concern both for environmental groups and for farmers and ranchers in that area. So anything we can do to help retain the water that we need and also reduce the friction and reduce the water for those farmers who want to continue to farm, I think would be a good use of our state funds, and especially because there's that 80% match. So I'd like to look at this tomorrow when we discuss this.